There we go. Now then, is there a weird noise your side?
No, I don't think so.
Then we're on. That is
Fine.
great. John, thank you so much for coming on Another Door podcast.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
I was just saying to you, I just think that the media at the moment, my goodness, what a transformation it's been going through. And if anything, reinvention stands for, it's kind of what's going on. So I can't wait to explore these. But another thing sprung to mind that I thought I'd mention to you today. I've been watching all the Olympics, and obviously, as content and audience director for sport, I'm sure you're completely immersed in it all. But my God, those people, those athletes and their mindset, and when they're going to have to reinvent themselves constantly to do what they're doing. So yeah, I was like, right, let's talk to John about that as well, because there's so much good stuff in there. Before we get stuck in, can you just give a quick introduction, and then we'll get stuck into our topic?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Jon Birchall. I'm Audience and Content Director for Sport at Reach PLC. So what that basically means is I oversee our content and digital strategy for our brands, such as the Mirror, Manchester Evening News, so on and so forth. So that's what I do at the moment. Originally from Warrington, just outside of Liverpool and Manchester. So yeah, that's basically me in a nutshell. I'm sure we'll go into a bit more of that.
Yeah, definitely. And as you say, you know, now you're all about the kind of the digital content side. Yeah. Did you start out as a more traditional journalist? Where did your career start?
Well, I didn't, to be honest. Now, I was going to mention this kind of as part of Reinvention. I landed into the industry just at the start of the 2010s. So kind of there's some thunder coming.
That was loud thunder.
Yeah, it's getting there. So I came into the industry in kind of 2009, 2010. So just out of the back of the recession. And that was kind of the pivotal point in the industry where it was like, okay, print is clearly declined to a certain extent. Print sales and circulation have been declining. Digital is it now. So I kind of went into a digital startup, goal.com. First of all, then went to Manchester United in a digital role before joining Reach. So I kind of joined right at the moment where things were really starting to change and transform. So, and then the pace of change has only got quicker since then, really.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that you're seeing that, as you say, it's kind of, it's evolving very quickly, but there's so much tradition in media.
Yeah.
What have you observed in terms of like an industry reinventing itself? I had an interesting conversation with someone earlier today about sometimes organizations resist it because they are what they are. People know them for what they are, and they resist change until they have to. So what's been your experience of the industry as a whole of, you know, embracing change?
Yeah, there's definitely been an element of that. And I think, so I came into Reach, Trinity Mirror as was in a purely digital role, and my brief was to kind of try and help with a lot of that change and encourage teams along the journey with that change, which, you know, has been a really interesting experience. You know, certain places found it more difficult than others, like you say, huge amount of tradition, and a really kind of emotive and passionate tradition within that. You know, a lot of our brands have kind of been hearts of communities. They've been on the kitchen table for families for decades. So to try and encourage people to step away from something like that and try something new. It's a challenge, but I think the fundamental thing, and I think the key thing for any industry, business, even person going through a significant change is kind of having a core fundamental principle as to what you are, what you do, and why you do it. So I think some people might have looked at a company like ours and saw our business as selling newspapers. I would look at it as reaching readers, reaching people, and trying to tell good stories. So the platform might have changed, but the fundamental principles basically remain the same, I think.
Yeah. That's a huge shift, isn't it? Like, what am I actually doing? And you can ask yourself that question as well as like businesses. Like, what are we actually trying to do? Not what our product is, but how is it solving a problem for someone, or what is it doing for somebody? Yeah. Did you find that there was resistance for consumers as well? Because I guess sometimes organizations can lead the way, but actually be so far ahead that consumers are resisting and saying, well, hang on a minute. And especially like what you just said, you know, that newspaper on the table, we all love that with a cup of coffee. So, you know, there's that as well as the organization's ambitions.
Yeah, I think I think we were probably led by the readers more than the other way around. I think, by the time I joined the business in 2014, I ended up at Reach having done some other roles. Social media was kind of at its peak. Facebook, Facebook by then, Netflix was in, Spotify was kind of comfortably in by then. The world had already started to change. And I think when I joined the business, we'd already started to make a lot of changes. And, there were people long before me who kind of instigated the change and the digital changes that we made. But even around our industry, The Guardian had gone very early digitally. The likes of the New York Times had done it as well. So I think we were kind of playing catch up a little bit compared to some of our competitors, and definitely compared to the public. And I think that's the key thing with an industry as big as ours, and kind of a company as big as ours. We're always kind of chasing, TikTok emerges through young people, Snapchat emerges through young people. They're beating us to the punch, and they're kind of telling us what they want. So then it's a case of us trying to catch up and deliver what they want.
Yeah. And that's it, isn't it? Are you going to be the leader, or are you going to be watching all the time, like what's going on, and trying to grab that?
Before Reach, I was working at Man United in the digital team. And although a huge company, massive confidence in the business, a global brand, United were always very cautious, in terms of stepping into new areas digitally. So I think they were the last big football club to have a Twitter account and that kind of thing, because for decades, although on the face of it, a huge modern company, it's still in the background, it's a football club first and foremost. Yeah. It's a digital business. So a lot of those changes do take a little bit of time. And again, it's like you say, it's what do the consumers want first and foremost. That has to be the fundamental thing. And then try and be guided by that. If you can predict what they want, all the better.
Yeah. And that's the trick. I remember I used to work for Virgin a while ago, and the CEO used to say, sometimes consumers don't know what they want. So sometimes you have to tell them or show them, and other times they know exactly what they want, and you got to listen to it. And the success is that thin line in between. It's like, oh my God.
It's so true, though. We'd also have kind of huge amount of audience research that we do in terms of we can see what people actually want versus what they tell us what they want. Yeah. And there's a fine line there in that, certain people say have absolutely no interest in this type of content, but then the numbers actually tell us otherwise. So there's always that trying to figure out what people are trying to say and what they actually want as well.
That's such a good point. And maybe people listening as well, like quite a few people on the podcast are going to start out their own business. And it's such an important point that people might say that they want something, but it's what they need, and it's what they're going to pay for ultimately, which is what you're trying to find. People say all sorts of things. Like I would probably say, no, I don't do clickbait. I don't want that. But then you suddenly find yourself clicking on some random crap that you disappear down a rabbit hole for about an hour. This
is the thing. Yeah, I think it's trying to find that balance between what data can tell you and what the pure numbers can tell you, but also, I mentioned Facebook earlier. Facebook have kind of got themselves into a little bit of trouble, I think, in that they were so driven by the data and what the algorithms were telling them. But then at the same time, that was presenting some real problems, because actually some of the stuff that people were engaging with and did like actually was kind of causing some real world problems and real trouble. So it's always trying to find that balance between what the consumers, what does the data tell you, but also having conversations with people and actually asking them and knowing who your kind of core users are and what they want, and core customers, I suppose. So it's always got to be a balance, I think.
Yeah. So one of the things I think is really interesting, I mean, you guys are growing, which is amazing, and you're always out there trying to find new people to come on and give that fresh perspective on the story. And I get people asking, how do you get into media? It's so hard. You must have to have, all of these exams, or you must have to have experience of being a journalist. How do you get in? So that's the other sort of hat that I thought would be interesting to chat to you about, because there is a real thirst out there. People do want to kind of be in the media now and be part of it and maybe make it a career. What's your sort of advice for people who want to reinvent themselves into the media?
So there's probably a couple of key lessons that I try and tell people when I have these conversations. I think the first is kind of, we are an ideas business. We are a storytelling business. So I think, sell your ideas as well as yourself, your CV. I've given jobs to people in the media who had absolutely zero journalistic experience, but they've been able to show that they've got great ideas and can tell them really well. There's someone who works for us at the moment who was actually working in Tesco in Liverpool city centre, didn't have a single journalistic degree, anything like that. But I found my way to that person's writing where they were just blogging and putting their ideas out there. It was shared with me on the internet, over Twitter. And I just thought they're the exact kind of person that we want. They've come in, they've learned on the job, and are now one of our key writers, and it's fantastic. So I think having ideas and knowing that there isn't one way to do it anymore. In the past, there was a very traditional way of getting into the media. Thankfully, that was kind of before my time, because I didn't necessarily do brilliantly in school. I did end up going to university. I managed to kind of squeeze my way in just before the tuition fees became kind of ridiculously expensive. So I got lucky in that sense. But again, it wasn't kind of my overall ambition. It was more just, that'd be amazing if I'd be able to do that. But I think as the newsrooms have diversified and the industry's diversified, the need for different skills has diversified at the same time. So, there have been certain skills and certain practices that have been in place in our newsrooms, our industry for decades, which actually I'll look at someone and say, well, I know you don't have that, but you can give us something completely different. I think I mentioned in an article that I did about this a few years ago, I don't know all the things or have the skills that our readers have. I don't have Snapchat. I don't have TikTok. I couldn't care less about some of these things, but I know a huge amount of our readers do. So actually having people who can bring those skills and bring new perspectives, that's absolutely key. Because I think the other thing, you put it perfectly, it's getting you angled on the stories, telling stories in a different way. And if you are a newsroom or an organisation that is full of, and I say this as a straight white male, but if you're a newsroom full of straight white males, you're only going to ever get that single perspective on a story. So I think the more that we try and open the doors and diversify, I think that's key. And I think the other thing is just having a really clear idea of what your kind of individual USP is. So what is it that makes you especially different? You can have the same CV as someone else. And again, it's a hugely competitive environment. But what is it that you actually bring? What is the one skill that you think you have above anyone else? And I think that's the thing I try and get across to kind of graduates or people looking at career changes. It's chances are you'll be in the same boat as someone with the same exam results, the same background. What is it that actually lifts you over them and gives us something different? So how do they make us better? Basically, it always asks.
Love that. And that comes back to your ideas, doesn't it? What's your angle on it? And I think everybody has very unique angles. Sometimes we just feel like we have to fit in the norm, we have to fit in the box to be accepted, but actually out of the box is interesting.
Always, absolutely. And again, it comes back to ideas and storytelling. Our job is to tell great stories that interest people, and you can only do that if you've got a complete mix of people throwing ideas in. My wife has no interest in the media industry. She works for a pharmaceutical company, so she's had a very busy year. But she'll kind of look at stories that we've written or ask questions that I've never even thought about because I'm so immersed in this world about football journalism. And she'll say, well, what does that mean? Or why does that happen? And you always need these people kind of prodding and asking questions to improve what we do. So, know what your USP is and don't ever think that there's kind of one set way. If someone in the industry tells you this is how you get into journalism, they're probably just reading from a sheet because there isn't one way. There's multiple myriad ways of getting involved with it, I think.
Yeah. So you talked about the graduates, but I'm assuming if people want to try and reinvent themselves, there's doors open to people who have got all sorts of different backgrounds. So, midlife career, whatever is going on, doors are open.
Absolutely. And again, it's the kind of, I think another thing that the media industry has probably kind of hurt itself with in the past is just trying to recruit from within the newsroom, assuming that all journalists will kind of be a reporter, then there'll be an editor, then there'll be a manager. And, for some journalists, that's fantastic. And that's the route that I was able to go down. For others, they've got no interest in that. But if we are only looking kind of internally at the people who are coming through our doors, you're not going to get different perspectives on management. You're not going to get different perspectives on on change itself. I think one thing that we're trying to do as an industry is professionalize, and the skills that you can bring from a completely different area, completely different industry are absolutely vital to what we do. So I think, because of that pace of change, we need people who, like you say, might have a career change, might think about something completely different, but they're bringing a new mindset to what we do, which we've just never experienced, because I'm a journalist, I'm not brilliant at certain things, which other people definitely will be.
Yeah. Do you feel like the media industry has got another couple of reinventions, like big leaps? I mean, there's so much now, isn't there, about, you mentioned Facebook, but fake news or clickbait or all of this stuff that has very negative connotations. Do you feel like we're moving into a new era? Is there reinvention again?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think so. We're still really in the infancy of kind of digital journalism in the grand scheme of things. Newspapers were with us for hundreds of years. Digital journalism, kind of newsrooms being run digitally first, online journalism first is a decade old in most cases. So I think a lot of the kind of early primitive stages of that are kind of, we're starting to see through those things. So clickbait, fake news, these issues that I think have been caused by kind of fairly basic business models, fairly kind of limited understanding of what audiences want and what they expect. So, I know early on, when I was first entering the industry, it was very much, how do we get a huge audience on this story? How do we reach the most people? Which, is key, and we want our journalism to have impact and reach people. But it's far more now about the relationship that you have. So, what is it that made a family buy the same newspaper day after day after day? What relationship did they have with them? And I think we're lucky in that we've been able to maintain a lot of those relationships with the work that we do. But we're also looking to build those relationships further. So, how do we get people to connect with us? What information can they give us, and what can we give them that kind of makes it a mutually beneficial relationship? Because I think the one big change that's happened really across the media industry at large, the entertainment industry, is kind of the idea of personalization and customizing whatever you want. So, people don't listen to albums, they'll make their own Spotify playlist. So, they'll watch one episode on something on Netflix and move to another. So it's so competitive, the kind of fight for people's eyeballs. So it can't just be about getting a load of people onto one thing and then they're moving on to the next. It's really about, how do you build a relationship that's kind of long-term, that makes people really care about you, which I think is true of any business, really. There's so many options out there now. It's really about, how do you build something that people love and come back to all the time.
Yeah. Sometimes it feels like choice is actually so overwhelming that the next big idea is actually no choice. Exactly. That's sometimes how it feels, doesn't it? It's like, oh my God, my brain is going to explode.
No, exactly. And I think that's also part of our job, to try and help guide people to make those choices. And, by being a trusted voice, by being a critical friend, I suppose, by being someone who, we're the person that you're talking from sports perspective, we're the person that you're talking to in the pub about the match, but we're also the experts that are saying, this is what you should look out for in the next game. So it's trying to not just be that one track mind, which comes back to getting different types of people and different types of skill sets in. Yeah,
that's amazing. And what you say, that piece about community as well is becoming more and more important. You see it everywhere now. And, what you guys do in this area, no, what do you call it? This area? I forgot what it's called. In your area.
Yeah.
What you guys do there is very community based and kind of reflecting that kind of sentiment of, like, this is something that I identify with and my identity. So,
well, I think it's a really good point. And I think the one thing that kind of online has changed is that idea of what community is, in that. So I happen to be from Warrington. I support Man United. I live in Liverpool, and I lived in London for a long time. So I've got lots of different communities that I really care about, that I'm not just interested in what the Liverpool Echo is saying because I live here. I also happen to really care about part of a Man United fan community, and that's something that spreads worldwide. I'm a fan of certain music, which puts me in a different community. So I think the idea of community now isn't just limited to a postcode. Yeah. It's, you could be a new mum and that puts you in a certain community, or you could be really interested in fishing. I don't know, all these different things where, all these communities now were so disparate in the past. We're trying to kind of capture people and make sure that they feel in their community we're we really care about them. So it could be that you happen to live on a certain street in a postcode like in your area, or it could be that you support your local rugby club and you've got a whole different community there with you at the same time. So it's trying to capture that relationship and be part of it as well.
Yeah, people's identities. So that's a really interesting point, that actually the online communities are enabling things that would never be able to happen otherwise. So, it's a very positive experience, hopefully, for people. So Reinvention, I mentioned there, I would love your take on sports people. I know that this is kind of a little bit of a digress, but it struck to my mind when I was watching the Olympics and thinking, wow, it just fascinates me, like life after sport. And you do a lot of, interviews and things with sports stars and athletes and people, what happens next to them.
Yeah.
I've got people that will talk to me in very similar ways, like their career has ended. What do they do next? What's your sort of insights to that, just from what you observe?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We actually, we've recently been talking to a company called Life After Professional Sport, a guy called Terry Moore, and their job is about getting people who kind of ended their sports careers, or they've had an injury and had to completely change, or they've been playing at academy level, then they get to the age of 18 and then they thought their life was going to be professional sport, and then all of a sudden it's not. And I think it's from speaking to the team at Laps and kind of speaking to other kind of footballers or other sports people, having done interviews, I think it kind of comes back to the point earlier around purpose and what is it that they want, what is it that they loved about sport, and how do they try and take those skills and apply them to something else. So, some people absolutely love the camaraderie of sport and being part of a team. And, the skills that they take from sport are really transferable into something else. Some people are just hyper competitive and love the idea of winning, whether that be in sport or business. So I think the people who struggle, and there've been a lot of issues around this in the past, and I think the support is getting better. It's not perfect. I know that there are sports people in certain areas who kind of get to the end of the career, or they might have an injury that kind of changes their course, and then all of a sudden they're really struggling for that purpose, because the life of a professional sports person is just so rigid and regimented that, without that around them, you kind of lose what their path is. But I think the key thing is, for a lot of people, it's knowing what's the one thing that grounds them, whether it be in their career, in their personal life. What is the one thing that brings them back to doing what they love every day? Because I think once you've got that, and it's the same for for us as papers, for me, I've got lots of things that I enjoy doing outside of the media. I'd like to think I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm definitely not good at. So if tomorrow came and all of a sudden I didn't have a job, it'd be, what are the things that I can bring? What's my USP? But also from a kind of sporting perspective, I'm really competitive. I love winning. I love when we, have to do a really great campaign or whatever it is. So how can I try and apply that to other businesses and other areas, I think?
Yeah. It is about soul searching a little bit, isn't it? And really digging deep and knowing there is another you. There's another version of you. It's a complete reinvention, but the you and the you that you used to be is still relevant. I think that's sometimes when you talk to people, it's hard.
Definitely. And it's funny. So I talk about my mum sometimes when I'm having conversations about this. So my mum was a childminder when I was little, and then me and my brother grew up, and she was kind of she was fed up with looking after so many kids running around the house. So, it was hectic. So she went and did something else for a little bit. But I think over time she realised that actually, it was being with kids, kind of helping them grow up, developing them as people. So she went back to working in the nursery, which is what she does now. And I think it took her time away from the thing that she was doing and she ended up in a completely different area. And, working in the nursery is different to what it was when she was childminding, but it took her that time of soul searching and spending a couple of years away from it to go, actually, this is the thing that I really do. And even if it's not the same job, I know that's the area I want to go back into.
Oh, I love that. It is a little bit of stepping back sometimes. It's not always progression. And that's the other thing, isn't it? Reinvention isn't always getting the next big leap. It's sometimes like, okay, step back to step forward. Definitely. And just checking in with where you're at in life.
Definitely. And I've definitely made changes in my career where it might have been a sideways step, or, I had a great job in London and then decided I wanted to move back up north because my wife's from Liverpool. So I made that change. But equally, when I was at Man United, I'm a United fan, that was a dream job. But something just didn't feel right with that role. So I kind of took probably a sideways step into my role, or into Trinity Mirror, which became Reach. But I kind of just knew deep down, having done that soul searching, that, yeah, this is the path that I need to be on now. And I think there's probably always something in there that's telling you, if you're not on the right path, just to kind of reflect and take the time to think about what is it fundamentally that I love doing, what is it I care about, and then making a call from there.
Yeah. Actually, your story is very inspiring because you're a massive Man United fan, and yet you let go of what should be on paper a dream job. Yeah. And I think sometimes people cling on to dream job too much at the expense of actually what you really want. So actually, that's a great example. Yeah. Did it feel like heartbreak at the time?
It felt a little bit strange because I mean, being in this industry anyway was a dream, to be honest. It wasn't something I ever expected I'd be able to do. So to eventually get to a place which, like you say, working at Old Trafford was the dream. I wanted to be a footballer when I was little. But, I think when you get a bit older, you realise that a dream, there's no real dream job. Every job has challenges. There's no perfect job. And although I loved it there and worked with great people, I just looked at their businesses' view of the world and my view of the world and kind of how I saw myself progressing. And there was nothing wrong with the job. I loved the job. It was just Trinity Mirror came up and I was like, there's something that really clicks here. So it was a little bit of a wrench, but no, I don't regret it.
Yeah, and I guess now you can enjoy football in a different way. You can kind of enjoy it from a neutral, observer point of view. So. Oh, Jon, thank you so much for sharing your stories and insights. I think it's so useful for people because I think at the moment people are feeling a bit lost, been through so much change, and at the same time businesses are transforming, all across the land. Retailers are having to think differently, media is thinking differently. So as well as an individual, big organisations are, and what that means for somebody. So thank you so much for coming on.
Not at all. And what I would say is, if anyone listening is interested in a career in the media or a career in sport, I know you've added me on LinkedIn, so they can find me through there, or by all means they can contact me after this, because it's it can seem like a fairly impenetrable industry, but I think people would be surprised by how different it is now, even compared to 10, 15 years ago. And we always want to hear from good people. So
pitch your amazing good idea to Jon.
Very much.
I might think of something myself. I might just pitch a good idea. I never have good ideas. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Much appreciated. Have a good evening.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.